Hello and welcome back to Analysis with me, Jonathan Steele. Today we're discussing the execution of Abdul Quader Mollah in Bangladesh. We invited Stephen Kay, co-chair of the War Crimes Committee of the International Bar Association, Murad Qureshi, member of the London Assembly for Labour, and on Skype, Brad Adams, executive director of Human Rights Watch's Asia division. But before we start our discussion, let's watch this report by Tayana Simons.
As Bangladesh celebrated its 42nd year of independence, violence erupted in the wake of the execution of Abdul Quader Mollah. Reactions to the execution have been mixed, with wounds still fresh from a war which estimated to have killed millions of people in 1971. Many celebrated the punishment of a leader convicted of crimes against humanity.
A few moments before we came to know that Quader Mollah has been hanged, and I think it is a victory for us in the month of our independence, and I am feeling it is another victory after 40 years of independence.
Many victims of the war, many victims of the genocide, they are waiting for justice, waiting for trial of the perpetrators of genocide, and Bangladesh has set up an example. Through this trial, Bangladesh has given a clear message that any country can try the perpetrators of genocide with its own law in the domestic tribunal.
However, protests have also erupted as supporters of Jamaat al-Islami believe that the War Crimes Tribunal is a farce, an attempt to purge prominent members of the opposition party in the run-up to elections. At least 6 people have now been killed in violent clashes across the country. Protests also erupted in Pakistan, where supporters of Pakistan's Jamaat al-Islami condemned the execution as politically motivated.
Pakistani Foreign Ministry should reach out and do lobbying internationally. They should run a campaign to stop the handing of penalty by fake tribunal.
A tribunal that was supposed to attempt to heal the wounds inflicted in Bangladesh's traumatic past has serious question marks hanging over it. Rather than bringing a sense of justice, the execution has stirred tensions that have the potential to destabilise Bangladesh once again. With the execution of 4 more opposition leaders approaching, it appears this is only the beginning of the political unrest to come.
Well, Murad, do you take the point that was being made in that video clip that this is actually destabilising, has the potential to destabilise Bangladesh and is creating new wounds?
I certainly would agree it's a destabilising effect. I was only recently out there in late October, early November, and saw the impact of the strikes and the hotels and what have you. It's fundamentally knocking the transport infrastructure out completely. It's very difficult to move around, and getting around in cities like Dhaka is incredibly difficulty with the roadblocks as well. And you know, it's going to have another cost on Bangladesh, its economic position. I mean, the thing that's had the most attention over the last year from Bangladesh has been the horrific death of 1,200 workers in the garment industry, and that shouldn't be forgotten. They're in danger of losing that sector if they don't get back on the road of civil affairs that people can go about doing their daily things, like moving around and what have you. What has actually happened is that the Jamaat supporters have gone out on the street and been quite plainly actually very destructive. I don't think it's helping their case at all when you start burning public buses, derailing trains, cutting down trees to block roads. If they had any sympathy, they're losing it very quickly as a result of this.
But do you think the victims of who suffered in 1971 take the point that I think Brad Adams was making, and you also made, that the real perpetrators, the Pakistani army, are getting off scot-free? So isn't there a sense among ordinary people, and particularly among victims, that there's something funny about this trial?
I don't disagree with Adams' point there. I had 2 uncles who themselves were shot by the Pakistani army. We're not going to get justice for them, and it is sad. But we do. I think the focus is on the collaborators, and this is this is in some ways similar to, I dare say, in World War II, with those who must have collaborated to put Jewish folk into concentration camps, moving them into the Nazi elimination of Jewish folk. That's why this is so raw. and that people have got living memories of this kind of stuff. And it also shouldn't be forgotten, many of them are actually been in power. When there was an Islamist BNP coalition in government, they've been used variously at various points, unfortunately in Bangladeshi politics, to put alliances together. And at the same time, some of them still advocate a united Pakistan. Now, after the grief we went through in 71, and I dare say 47, these things are a painful truth. And that's why I've always felt if the country's going to move forward, it needs to deal with these things. Hopefully forgive as well, but not forget the huge cost that it's had. And I think actually in some ways, rather than the legal process, truth and reconciliation that we saw in South Africa there is a place to be played in this for us to get to terms with it. And it also affects us overseas Bengalis. We have many of the alleged accused passing through places like London quite regularly, and it regularly activates a hive of activity. I'd like to see that time and energy put into other things, but we're not going to do that until we've dealt with it.
Well, Brad Adams, let me come back to you to the issue of the death penalty. I mean, I know obviously Human Rights Watch is against the death penalty on principle, but I mean, if there hadn't been this switch whereby the judges gave them life sentences and then the pressure came to change it to death penalty, do you think there would have been less dissension inside Bangladesh over this whole issue if they were, and they wouldn't be martyrs in the same way if they'd been given prison sentences and that had stood?
Well, I mean, the original pressure came from people who opposed the life sentence. I mean, Mollah made possibly a fatal mistake. He gave a victory sign after he was given a sentence. That photograph went viral, and immediately people poured into the streets, particularly in Dhaka, but also in other parts of the country, demanding the death penalty. It was a pretty grotesque kind of protest, and of course, a lot of people involved in it claimed that they weren't really out for blood, but there they were. Asking for the death penalty, and the government immediately passed legislation changing the rules about appeals, allowing the prosecution to appeal an acquittal, and the Supreme Court was under massive pressure to deliver a death sentence, and they did it. I think that pressure was both from the public and political. But once they've given him the death sentence, yes, it has made him a martyr, which is exactly what they should have tried to avoid. And the polarization in the country is even deeper, although, of course, it was already extremely deep. The Prime Minister, the opposition leader, Khaleda Zia, haven't spoken for years until very recently when they did speak, and there is a hilarious transcript of their conversation showing just how deep the divide is between the two. The level of pettiness was shocking, and I wish there was a possibility for reconciliation. I think justice and reconciliation can go hand in hand. But when there is no middle ground between the parties, when it's impossible for leaders of these parties to speak, and when no matter who's in power, the other side simply engages in the politics of opposition and trying to bring down the government, then it's really hard to imagine that there's a social, cultural, or political basis for that kind of reconciliation. And so I think that even without these trials, we'd have lots of street protests. There would be violence on the streets. It's just added gas to the flames, and it's going to make things that much worse and that much more difficult for the country to heal and recover.
Well, what has the international legal community done about this? I mean, has anybody supported the way the Bangladeshi legal authorities have brought in this death penalty, for example, as we've been hearing, because of public pressure, and then retroactively and retrospectively, etc.?
Absolutely. The public international legal community has given advice to Bangladesh right from 2010 how to structure this court, how to bring about a wholesome and proper international standard trial system. At every twist and turn, the Bangladesh government rejected that advice. That advice came from the International Bar Association throughout the world, from Human Rights Watch, from the United Nations, from the US Ambassador for War Crimes, Stephen Rapp, from every single source. Legal academics throughout the world were condemning the system that had been established as unfair. Instead, it was misrepresented to the people in Bangladesh what the international community has said, just as that prosecutor did in the clip. He said it was to international standards. He knows full well that his tribunal has not been operating to internationally acclaimed standards. Far from it. There have been many breaches of international standards that he has been advised upon, told about, and has deliberately ignored. Now, the death of Mollah by a change in the law that retrospectively applied the death sentence to his case is actually a judicial killing for which there is political and legal responsibility. And that is a matter that must rest on the conscience of the politicians concerned as well as the judges who applied it. Because at the end of the day, they have forfeited their right for international legal respect and found wanting and weak when they should have stood up for justice. The journalist on there, the war veteran and journalist who said, we're interested in justice and we've shown the international community that you can hold your own trials, actually is ignoring the facts that the international community wanted standards, and if those standards had been applied, would have accepted the trials as long as they were fair and impartial. Yeah. That has not happened here, and I'm afraid that once you go down this route, you are entering the world of war criminals yourself.
Well, the election is coming up in January. I mean, is this actually playing a role in it? I mean, are there credible opposition parties that are condemning the government for this, or is everybody's joining the bandwagon?
Adam's right, actually. The two political leaders, the Prime Minister and the opposition leader, barely talk to each other. I was there when they had this infamous telephone conversation, and it was incredible. I mean, it was all documented, transcripts in the press and what have you. When you've got that as the body politics between the political parties, it's actually pretty dysfunctional. They've not agreed into the arrangements around the election. Historically, Bangladesh has had caretaker governments, something which I'd like to see here, quite honestly, but what hasn't been done on this occasion because the present government feels it's able to deliver the election on time. I'd be very surprised now if we do have an election on the 5th and a state of emergency isn't declared, would be my expectation in the meantime. But the opposition party
is not making this trial an issue and condemning the government in the way that Stephen Kay has been condemning the government. Yeah. So is it really an election issue?
Well, it's an election issue insofar as I dare say the present government wants to be able to go back to the electorate and say they've dealt with the issue, one of the issues that was brought. They were given an electoral mandate on 2008. What has become an electoral issue, I dare say, is the transport infrastructure completely been destabilised, and the general strikes.
But then people would blame Jamaat for that. They won't blame the government.
Indeed, and that's interesting. I'm not sure which way it's going to fall on this front. I can certainly say from my last experience of going through the country, it colours your mind about what you want out of a country, and you just want governance which make sure that those kind of services are readily available. People are complaining about not being able to take their kids to do examinations and things like this. That's
it's not the first time there have been strikes in Bangladesh's recent history. They're almost frequent.
Yeah, every time we go through the same rituals. You're quite right, and I dare say we're not going to see the last of this. But the intensity is quite different this time. I've not seen the ferociousness of it, and it's actually killing people. People have been burnt in buses, in cars, and overturned rail fixtures. That's a new level that it's reached.
And you think because of that there might have to be a state of emergency and postponement of the elections?
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I really would not be surprised in the time between the 5th that something like that happens. We've seen it before in Indian subcontinent politics, Indira Gandhi in the 80s. In some ways, this it'll be interesting to see how and when that does or not happen. But that's my expectations at the moment. I think there is a democratic tradition amongst Bengalis. We haven't fought. Well, there's previously been a major issue when we've had military governments who've had to civilianise themselves by going into the political process. And I dare say, if you see the Bengalis abroad, they're very focused on the democratic process as well, and they'll exert their pressures here. It will be a calculated political gamble by both sides, and who agrees when the election happens and on what terms.
Brad Adams, I mean, do you think there's any chance that now that they've, one of these defendants has actually been hanged and there has been this sort of protest and so on, do you think it's possible now that for the other defendants there may be slightly less harsh treatment and that the prosecution people, if you like, have learnt a sort of lesson and people may feel, well, enough justice has been done, quotes unquotes, we don't have to hang all the others as well?
I would love to think that's true, but I doubt it very seriously. I think, we were told from the beginning that it was very important to Sheikh Hasina and the Awami League that there be a hanging before the election. And actually, a number of people told us 3 years ago that it would be very close to the next election in order to galvanize public opinion, because this is unfortunately popular in Bangladesh, not least because, as Stephen says, people have been fed a diet of half-truths about what's really happened in court. And so I don't think so. I think if the Awami League wins re-election, we will see more trials, we will see more death sentences, we'll see more hangings. If they lose, and this is the Awami League's claim to the public, the BNP, which has criticized the process and has said that they would start from scratch if they came to power, would probably find a way to nullify all these convictions. And the Awami League and many members of the public think that that means that these people will go free, and we will only have had one hanging and one conviction stand the test of time. And so both sides are engaging in politics in this process, unfortunately. There's no party that isn't politicizing this for their own ends.
And do you agree with Murad's prediction that there could be a delay in the election now because of all the destabilization?
There's lots of discussion about delay. In 2006, we had the reverse situation. It's a mirror image. The Awami League was leading the protests against the BNP because they thought the BNP was meddling with the caretaker system of holding the elections. In 2007, early 2007, the army stepped in, and for 2 years, they ran a de facto military government with a civilian face. And that failed very badly, and it stained the reputation of the Bangladeshi army. And so most people think the army is very reluctant to be dragged into this. But the level of violence on the streets, and we put out a statement yesterday documenting how many people have been killed in what ways, and their horrific deaths through fire, arson, through being shot, kids being killed by playing with unexploded ordnance on the streets. It may be that the circumstances end up requiring some institution to come in to provide security. That will be a disaster for the democratic process in Bangladesh, however.
And do you agree with the point that the violence now in the last few weeks is worse than anything for decades? Is that right?
I think at this point it's a little worse than in 2006. It was very bad in December of 2006, but it has the likelihood of getting much worse. And the Jamaat people are at the leadership level, and the lawyers in Jamaat are trying to calm things down. But their youth wing, the Shabir movement, and others are very angry, and they're engaging in attacks that are being met with extreme violence by the police and law enforcement. And it's already spinning out of control in some places and can get much, much worse.
Well, Murad, do you think there is a chance that the army would intervene?
Again, having been through Dhaka recently, I didn't pick that vibe up. I think it would be something where they've been through previously and would be very hesitant to do so. It'll be interesting to see what other international pressures are being put as well. Undoubtedly, diplomats in Dhaka will be playing a role in this, as well as the army in trying to get the party politics of it sorted. But from what I saw of that telephone conversation between Khaled Azir and Sheikh Hasina, it would be it would be a very difficult task to achieve diplomatically. even if, through the foreign diplomats based in Dhaka, and historically the army has stepped in to at least give people one thing, which is security on the streets to go about their daily activities.
Well, I think on that bleak note we'll have to bring it to an end. A trial that's really mixed with politics, beginning and end, and is now having a huge effect on politics rather than politics on the trial. Thank you very much indeed, Stephen Kay. Thank you, Murad Qureshi, and thank you, Brad Adams from Human Rights Watch on Skype. And of course, thank you for watching the programme.